Hi everyone, welcome to TechSolvingQuestions.com poker training video membership. Today I'm going to be talking about context, which is a big part of poker. We're going to get straight into it. Context is an interesting concept. For what one person thinks context is, another person has a bit more of a fuller idea and they have the full context. So hopefully we're going to learn a thing or two today. Let's get straight into it. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about opponent types, number of opponents, stack size, history, hand strength, position, format, and then we're going to sum up with a bad example of a hand in context and also a good example, and then we're going to wrap it all up. So the idea behind today's lecture is basically, I get a lot of people that say, look, I'm really struggling with poker, I need help. You say, look, throw some hands at me, maybe we could do a hand history review. And what they tend to do is give you a very brief, you know straight away that they've got problems, because if someone's coming to you and saying, I got it all in with no pair against the flush draw, you're like, well, there's a bit more to it than that. When you're taking in the context of the situation, you might actually find out that there's something you could have done differently. So with that in mind, we're going to look at several considerations that we've just discussed briefly. Okay, so opponent type. When you're talking about context in a hand, your opponent type is a massive part of your decision making. So whether you're new to poker or you've got a bit of experience, there's lots of different opponent types in poker. You've got a call-in station, a donkey, a nit, a lag, a tag, maniac, professional, and there's other ones in between as well. Most of these terms you should already know. If you don't, call-in station is obviously someone that just calls a lot, they're very stubborn. A donkey is just a generic term for a bad player, very inexperienced, going to make a lot of mistakes. A nit is someone that's ultra conservative, plays way too few hands, and is basically can get bullied around. A loose aggressive is someone, they could be a good lag or a bad lag. It's someone that plays a lot of hands, plays them aggressively. A tag is another aggressive opponent, but it's someone who plays a bit more solid. A maniac is someone that's just in every hand, going crazy. And a professional is obviously a winning player, someone who has a good idea of poker, and obviously experienced and knows all the important parts of making a good poker player. So when facing any decision on any round, your opponent's playing style is a big factor. So if they're only playing the strongest of hands, you'll probably be inclined to fold a hand like ace 10. On the other side, if they're a maniac, ace 9 doesn't look so bad. So that's just a little lesson in context there. So taking into your opponent type will help you make better, more informed decisions based on their tendencies. So that's a pretty obvious one. Moving on. Number of opponents. This is one I hope most of you do have a good appreciation of, but I think it's a good thing to just remind ourselves of. We have done a lecture before on multi-way poker, so hopefully you can refer back to that. But every decision you make in poker should take into account the number of opponents involved. If you're not seriously considering this, you're missing a massive part, because the number of opponents you've got in a hand, apologies for that, is it is a big factor. If you're playing heads up and you've got second pair in position, that's quite often a reasonable hand. You're going to miss most flops. Whereas if you've got top pair 4-way on a wet board, let's say it's 3, 4, 5 of hearts, and you've got ace 5 with no hearts, that's a very little value. So the number of opponents in a hand is definitely something you need to take a massive consideration in. Obviously, the more people in a pot, the stronger the hand required to win at showdown, generally. Obviously, top pair sometimes or second pair will be good. This isn't a universal truth, but it will impact your decision making. And taking into account how many players are involved in a pot will save you tournament chips, and it'll save you money in cash games as well. Stack sizes. This is one that, again, people that come in to us and they need mentoring and need help, they don't fully grasp the importance of stack sizes. If you're an experienced player, this will just be a revision for you, and I'm sure you'll be very well aware of it, but yours and your opponent's stacks are one of the most important parts of any hand. If you're both deep stacked, you have great flexibility. You're able to do bigger bluffs. You're also able to set mine with little pairs because you've got good implied odds. In other words, you're willing to play more speculative hands when they're deep stacks, because hopefully if you hit your hand, you will hope to win big. And if you've got a smaller stack, you have to weigh up whether your bet is likely to commit you to call in and all in, or whether they are the type of person that's going to be bullied around if they'll let you. And this is less frequent in cash games, but it's a fundamental part of tournament poker, stack sizes. Often, people playing between 5 and 35 big blinds. If you've got more than 40 or 50 big blinds in a tournament, particularly online ones, That's generally a good stack. Whereas cash games, everyone's playing 80 big blinds minimum. So apologies for the noise in the background. So yeah, failing to pay attention to stacks and act accordingly will be a huge leak. This is particularly true for tournaments, because if you're all in before you're doubling up everyone, you're going to be losing a lot of tournament chips. Cash games is very important as well, particularly when you're playing post flop though. History. This is something that I think everyone could take a minute to think about. The history that you have with that player, the recall you've got with your opponent and what their perception of you is very important in poker. That's effectively when you do hand history reviews or you look at your poker tracking stats. That's all history. That's part of your poker journey, it's part of your history. And we're creatures of habit. People, particularly weaker players as well, they're not constantly looking to improve or change the way they play. People are set in their ways. So yeah, what happened in the past should influence your decision on the now. If you have information on a player based on what he'd done last month when you saw him, and then he's just repeated it half an hour ago, you got insights into what he'll probably do in the future. This is invaluable, as players are creatures of habit. Most players repeat the same mistakes and the same value bets too. Generally, it's only the experts that are mixing their play up enough to cast doubt in your mind. They're the only ones that constantly evolving, looking to improve the way they play, and are willing to radically change the way they play and adapt as well. So remembering the history of an opponent, and yours as well, if used effectively, is a surefire way to exploit them. And that is basically one of the most fundamental parts of poker, is exploiting opponents' weaknesses. Hand strength. Okay, this is another part of context. Again, it's an obvious one, but it's still worth highlighting. Your hand strength, of course, it's an important part of decision making. But this is also worth, a good little reminder of the concept of relative hand strength, which again, new players and even players who have played for a year or two don't really grasp it. If they hit top pair, they're going to get to the river. They might end up folding on the river, but they might have lost enough chips or money by that point. So relative hand strength is very important. It's the theory that your hand is relative both to your opponent, the texture of the board, and how many people are involved as well. So yeah, of course, your hand strength will determine whether you're playing the hand on a bluff, when you're planning to fold, or if you're likely to have the best hand and therefore want to extract value. Now, as the hand progresses, your opponent's betting pattern will help you identify whether you have the best hand or not. And that's not an easy thing to do straight away from pre-flop or even on the flop, but as the hand progresses, Tex Hold'em has played over several rounds of betting. By the time you get to turn or river, by process of elimination, you'll normally get an idea of it's probability. Am I probably going to have the best hand here? Do I have the best hand now? Will I likely have the best hand at the river? So yeah, hand strength is probably the most important piece of information in any given hand. No surprise there, but since this lecture is based on context, we need to cover the most important parts here. Position. I've banged this drum enough times, and I'm going to continue to do so. We're not going to go into it for an hour on this one, but where you're playing from is another thing to bear in mind. Of course, it's the start of any hand really. The first thing, as soon as you sit down at a table, as the cards are dealt, what position are you in? It's the point where hand reading begins, and also hand selection will vary from one position to the next. Well, that's a massive part. It's the point. You can already start to eliminate many hands. So, for instance, a tight player opening from under the gun, they're likely to have a tight range. Therefore, we can safely eliminate a lot of hands from their range. This is huge, as it allows us to play better post flop. Once you can eliminate a wide range of hands from people's, you're halfway there. So your position is equally important. If you're in position, you'll be acting after your opponent, which we know is a huge benefit, informational advantage. And conversely, if you're out of position, you're probably going to need to tread a little bit more carefully, be a little bit more cautious, because you're unlikely to control the pot the way you wish. Also, you'll be acting first and not have the informational advantage that you do have when you are in position. So yeah, position is huge. Treat it with respect and you will learn from it. The format. Okay, so Tex Hold'em, obviously, there's basically, and I'm not going to go to short-handed or full ring in this lecture. We know that. I'm kind of covering it in here format as well. But yeah, the format you're playing is very important to any hand you're playing. Whether it's tournament or cash game, they are two different beasts. That's really a fundamental part. You're probably not going to be a master of both. It takes a lot of time to be, proficient in both forms. I would recommend, specialising in one and trying to dominate that niche, if you like. But yeah, tournament poker is about survival, effectively. You survival up to a point and then winning it. Whereas cash games are just, bang, bang, there to win money there and then. So the two opponent types you're going to face are often very different as well. Not always, but often. Cash game players, they're not concerned about if you're stealing their blinds, and they don't feel as much pressure, and most of them are probably going to be quite confident post-flop as well. Even, the average break-even players that play cash games have a pretty good understanding of how to play post-flop poker. Tournament players, in contrast, they're thinking about their stack size relative to the blinds. They're constantly looking at when the blinds are going up. They're trying to stay above the average stack, and they're basically concentrating on getting in the money and then going on from there. So yeah, one is deep stack playing with advanced poker, post-flop poker, while the other is a more strategy-based game. Both of them have merits. I really do love tournaments. I'm a massive fan of tournaments, and particularly for new players, I think it's a good idea to get the strategy behind that. Cash games takes a lot of work in terms of you're going to find so many different scenarios, but it does build a better poker player, the cash games. So yeah, now we're going to move on to, we've considered the fundamental parts of any hand, context, as we were just saying, stack sizes, number of opponents, format, history, these are all important parts, table image as well, these are, perception, all these things are going to factor into your decision making. So I'm going to give you two examples now of, a hand being told, or, if you need help. So here's the bad example. I raced $8 with ace jack. I got called by one or two players, I can't remember which for sure. Flop came jack high, I bet out, got re-raised, I decided to shove. He called me with just a draw and he sucked out. Now when you listen to that, you don't really get any substance. That's the story of someone who's, doesn't really know a whole lot about poker, in my opinion, because they're not really told you that much. What do we know from what they've said? They know, you know the amount they've raised, the hand they've got, they've hit top pair, top kicker, and they've got it all in. We don't know how much it's, they've stacked off for. We don't know the odds, because even though we know he's got a draw, but we don't know much else there. We know he's lost. Now, when you read that story just like that, and if you don't know much about poker, that just sounds like, we got pretty unlucky there. You got in with the best hand. What can you do? You move on. You don't see any mistake. But it's very difficult to help someone this is their line of thinking. That's why context is important. If you're telling, if you've got a coach or if you've got friends and you want to improve, you do need to give full scope and consider that in your decision making, and that'll make you a better player. So now we're going to look at a good example to see the differences. So here's a good example. I was playing No Limit 200, sitting with $350 with a solid image. I raced $8 with ace jack off suit, and a nitty passive player called from late position, and a maniac defended from the big blind. We're all pretty deep. The flop came jack of hearts, 10 of hearts, 3 of clubs. The maniac checked. I bet $17. The nit made it 42. The maniac folded. I tank folded and asked him to show. He showed king of hearts, queen of hearts, so I felt pretty good about my fold. I figured he hadn't had like that on set, so I knew my odds weren't good. Now that's quite a big difference there, isn't it? Look at just the amount of text for a start. We know, if we're going to go into this in detail, look, we know what stakes it is, we know his image, we know how much money he's got, we know the opponent. Look, there's two opponents here where he's identified that. We know the positions that they're in, we know they're deep stacked, we know the exact flop and the texture, so we've got a pretty mixed board texture there. Jack 10 3. What hands, we've got a pretty strong hand, but with three-way, there's certainly draws there. Jack 10, pocket threes are, plausible hands. Also, we know that the nit is a passive play. Yeah, he's raising now, and he's raised over our bet when there's a guy behind as well. So yeah, there's a lot of information there. And look, what's the difference here is that he's lost $17 versus, if we assume that the same guy had $350, he might have lost $350, and moreover, that's a massive overbet as well. So there's the difference there between context from someone who's, has a good understanding of poker and, wants to improve, and, they consider the situation properly, versus someone that's just playing cards. Two big differences, and context is, it's a huge part of, if you want to improve at poker, information. What are you doing? What are your opponents doing? Where are you playing? What hand have you got? What hand are they likely to have? What's the texture of the board? How many people are involved? What's the size of the bet? This will all help you make good decisions. So, to sum up, the more information you have and absorb, the better decision you'll make. You'll also learn and improve quicker, as you'll be taking into account the full context instead of fixating on the outcome or the hands alone. This is the start of appreciating a fuller picture of what good poker playing requires. So yeah, this is a 15-minute lecture. We've touched on basically what context means in poker. I hope some of this will probably be revision for you, particularly if you're an experienced player. This probably won't surprise you, but it's a good thing to remember sometimes. When you're looking at a hand, are you looking at it from this level, or are you looking above and you've seen exactly what's going on? If you're looking above, forget the outcome. Are you happy with the decision making throughout the hand? Is there anything you could have done better? So yeah, hope you've enjoyed this lecture. If you have any requests or feedback, do get in touch with us at info@texashold'emquestions.com. Thanks and Happy New Year.